Inflation is high recently, like really high, higher than billionaires' rockets, higher than used car prices, and it poses a threat to our future financial health that we need to be aware of. But what I don't hear people talking about is something much more subversive and sneaky and nasty. Shrinkflation. No, it's not something that happens to you when you swim in cold water, thankfully. It's actually far worse than that. But the good news is that we can take actions to be aware of it and to strengthen our finances elsewhere so it becomes not so big of a deal, or at least not as big of a deal. Let's talk about what it is, why it's here, and what we can actually do about it. Let's go. First, what is shrinkflation? Shrinkflation is the process of items shrinking in size or quantity, or even sometimes reformulating or reducing the quality while the prices remain the same or even increase. It's like in 2010 when Kraft reduced the size of that Toblerone chocolate bar from 200 grams to 170 grams. When family-size cereal boxes suddenly lost 1.2 ounces but were sold for the same price. When Dove soap conspicuously shrunk by 0.25 ounces. When Shreddy's cereal lost 110 grams. When Barilla gave you 10% less spaghetti for about the same price. It hit all over the place. Yogurt, Domino's Pizza, and a bunch of others. I haven't personally noticed those other things, like I don't watch that close enough to know if something shrinks by 10% or 15%, but I have noticed lowered quality. Think about what like a $500 piece of furniture buys you today versus 10 or 20 years ago. It's pretty amazing how terrible the quality of things can be. And this is ridiculously prevalent. So why are companies doing this? What's the deal? Well, it's for the same reasons that they have to deal with inflation. And inflation is here for a bunch of different reasons. So let's talk about that next. First, what is inflation? Well, inflation reflects the broad rise of prices or the fall in the value of money. This is typically across a lot of different areas. It's not just talking about like breakfast food or Doritos or something. And inflation generally results from too much demand chasing not enough goods and services. Like there's a shortage. And so that naturally leads to prices going up. So why is inflation here? What are we doing having this inflation happen? Why is it around? Well, it's here for a handful of different reasons. For one thing, people saved a bunch of money during the pandemic. It peaked at 30% in April of 2020. So we were just basically hoarding money as much as we could. Plus, we got infusions of cash from things like stimulus checks, advanced child tax credit money. And so as restrictions started to lift, we had more cash than normal, which means we were ready and willing to spend it. And that recent jump in spending put an already crunched supply system, like the boats that are stuck out there at port, that recent jump put everyone in that supply chain system under even more pressure and more delays. There's boats trying to get in. There's dock workers who are in short supply. There's not enough truck drivers. There's not enough factory workers. All of these things were just exacerbated by this big lump of spending that we all did. We have lots of demand. We have not enough supply. Let's talk about the inflation that we see and actually hear about. We notice things like rising prices and people quoting numbers like 7.5% inflation. And that's the kind of stuff people talk about. That's how we find out about this kind of thing. We see gas prices rising. We notice when cars are all selling for more money than they were 2 or 3 years ago, and it's just hard to get them. And those kinds of headlines and percentages and things and comparisons to the past, they're notable and we feel it, but we also kind of forget about them. Okay, inflation rose at 7%. So what am I supposed to do about that? It's just another big economic tectonic plate shifting under our feet, right? Like we can't control it, we can't change it, so why do I really need to know? And that's the tricky part about shrinkflation. For one thing, we don't talk about it as much as inflation. It's not like it's all over the news like inflation is. We don't have a nice tight little simple one-figure number to track it like we do with inflation, and so it's hard to compare that to past years. But you are hit with it a lot right now, whether you realize it or not. All those examples from all that food and different stuff from before where you're paying the same money and getting less may not feel like it's significant enough for you to really notice or pay attention to, but the difference is enough for the companies to change their bottom line. They're doing the shrinking so that they can stay in business or so that they can stay profitable. So it's actually making a big difference. And when people notice that, and when they confront the companies that are actually doing this, here's how they respond. General Mills, for instance, says that they've been working on creating consistency and standardization across our cereal products, making it easier for shoppers to distinguish between sizes on the shelf. For consumers seeking the best price per ounce, like a unit price, the most value is normally in our larger boxes of cereal. This change also allows more efficient truck loading, leading to fewer trucks on the road and fewer gallons of fuel used, which is important in both reducing global emissions and offsetting increased costs associated with inflation. So they're trying to spin this as a green initiative, like they're saving the earth by doing this, that it's somehow helping us to shop because we can tell what the different sizes of boxes are like we couldn't before. We were blindly unaware. And if we want to shop by the cheapest unit price, which is price per ounce, then we already know where to go. So it doesn't really make a difference. Somehow I have a feeling that there's a little bit more profit motive going on there than they're really explaining. So is this just a momentary thing? Is it something that's going to blow over here in the next few months? Well, apparently not, because there's some experts out there who believe that this is going to stick around for at least another year or two in really record-setting ways. And obviously companies are going to remain unwilling to just lose money. They're going to shrink the product or raise the prices, or potentially both. I just realized they could do both at the same time and we may not even notice. So what can we actually do about it? What kind of control do we have? First of all, we can pay attention. I mean, just being aware of something is the first step in making a change. And so you could, I guess, really look at the shelves really close and see what prices of things are and compare kind of what the unit cost would be over time. But then you'd also be kind of a crazy person who has like this gargantuan spreadsheet of like everything you've ever bought, and you're entering that in as you like walk around Target. So that could be a little bit crazy and boring and time consuming. Another tactic could be make your own stuff instead. Obviously, we can't just fabricate everything that we need, but if you can get the raw materials for cheap and make stuff at home, then it could be a hobby, it could impress your friends, it could be kind of fun, it could be a win-win. And obviously the hope would be that you'd save money doing that. So think about something like baking at home instead of buying baked goods. You could make them at home, but that's generally more expensive and does taste better, but it's more expensive. You could also do something like woodworking. Someone like Mike from Modern Builds, which is another YouTube channel, shows you that you really don't need expensive tools or fancy materials or crazy designs to make legitimate furniture for yourself. The third tactic to fight shrinkflation or inflation is to hold very little cash in your life. And by cash, I mean either physical, literal cash like in your wallet, or just savings that you have in a bank account. The value of cash is just stagnant compared to the price of everything else moving around it. And so it's not going to go up in value the same way that maybe your cereal goes up in price. It can't keep up. And when those prices go up by something like 7.5% like they did here recently, that means the value of your cash has effectively gone down by that same amount. The more cash you have, the more value you're losing. And that can seem counterintuitive because like you still have the same number of dollars, and so it's not like that's changing, it's just the value of it's gone down. Come on, cash, do something. Have some little cash babies here for us. Replicate yourself. And to do that, you need to invest. Investing is the fourth tip, because investing is probably the best way to keep up with inflation because it's actually forcing the value of your money to grow. For me, I think of it as a long-term defense against inflation and shrinkflation because I'm expecting my investments to grow faster than inflation or shrinkflation will threaten them and make them shrink. And if you could invest a lot and handle the long-term effects and then make a lot of your own stuff or go without it, you'd handle the short-term effects and you could kind of have it from both ends. You'd take care of both of the terrible inflations, in and shrink, inflation and shrinkflation. I hope that made sense and you kind of understand coming away from this what shrinkflation is. But if not, leave me a comment. And speaking of comments, the secret comment word for today is Oreo. If you enjoyed the video, leave me a comment that says Oreo somewhere in it, or leave me like a cookie emoji. I'll keep an eye out for these because they are my favorite comments by far. If you do decide that you want to keep your money from getting a giant bite taken out of it by inflation or shrinkflation or any of these flations, I recommend watching this video next, which is what exactly happens to your money when you invest it. This lays out the difference between holding your money in cash and actually investing it, and it tells you step by step what's happening there. So you can understand exactly why this beats inflation or shrinkflation, and it protects the value of your money. Click on this box right here to see that video.